Alrighty. Welcome back to the Contacts Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Michelle Noeth, who is the athletic director at Lost Altos High School. She is the CCS Athletic Director Association President and the California State Athletic Director Association Vice President. Coach, thanks for taking the time out of your day to sit with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. Been looking forward to this for a while. So we are going to dive in by you helping the audience understand your background and path to the seat you are in now, including your coaching stops and sports and high school career, college experience until you got to where you are now.
All right. I'm not going to start from when I was a young little kid. I'll fast forward to when I moved to San Lorenzo from Alameda. My mom got me registered to play soccer and softball. So I did club for a little bit when I was younger. And then the high school that I went to it was at the time an 8 through 12. And so I played soccer up until my freshman year of high school, because my PE teacher at the time, Ms. Gane, she saw something in me. Maybe it was the skinny little legs that we can compare to each other of she might be a fast runner or a good runner. And so she encouraged me to go out for cross country. So in high school, I ended up doing cross country, basketball, and track, which is kind of a fun little fact, because right now a lot of kids don't realize that I used to play basketball once upon a time. They only think that all I ever did was run. But I multi-sport athlete. Like I said, I even played a little bit of softball and soccer. So that was kind of neat when I was younger. But when I got into high school, I was more in tune with running because I was pretty good at it. So I went with what I was good at. And from there, I ended up competing at Chabot Community College under Ken Grace. So a lot of my students currently, I tell them it's okay to compete at the community level and get your AA and then transfer to the 4-year. So I ran at Chabot cross country and track for a couple of years. And from there transferred to Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay, still Hayward in my heart. But I ran for Coach Gray at the time, and I did cross country and track there. And the highlight of that competitive series of my life was being able to go to nationals 2 years in a row in my baby event, which is the 800 meters. So that was my love event that everybody thinks I'm crazy for loving. And I love doing the relays as well. But so in high school, my coach during track had me do all the events under the sun that required any type of running. So it's neat because when I became a coach, one of the things that I had told her at the time was, hey, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take your job. Because I always thought that it would be cool to come back to my alma mater, become a high school coach, teach PE, coach cross country and track, because the way she made me feel as a student who was super self-conscious about myself, super self-conscious about my body and everything, basically found a place for me to thrive as a person and as a leader and felt comfortable. And I even had her for PE. So I wanted to be similar to how she was, of getting kids who may not be the most sporty people, but feel very welcomed and comfortable in her class. And so once I graduated from Cal State Hayward and got my credential, I became a PE teacher at Pittsburgh High School. So Pittsburgh High School near Antioch was my first stomping grounds of my career. And I feel like if you could teach and coach at Pittsburgh, you can go just about anywhere. The kids there were amazing. It's a very, very diverse community. I loved coaching over there. Our cross country team had at least 100 kids, 80 to 100. They're just such good-hearted students there that I really enjoyed my coaching stint there. And I was an assistant track coach at Pittsburgh High School. And then finally a job opened up at Arroyo, and that was where I went to high school, my alma mater. And so I was like, all right, I said one day I wanted to go back to my alma mater and coach and do all that stuff. So I did. So I left my job at Pittsburgh High School and got a job closer to home, which I live in Fremont currently, and became the head track coach and became the cross country coach, the head cross country coach, and became a PE teacher, taught EL classes for PE. And so I thought that'd be the place that I would stay and, seal my roots and everything in my coaching career. And 2007, 2008 is when the turn of the economy happened and there was a reduction in force. And to me, I couldn't just sit around and not have a job and just wait for the district to call me back during the summer. To me, I'm not one of those that can just sit there and wait. I need action. I need to know where I'm going with my life. And so I ended up taking a job at Terra Nova High School out in Pacifica. So I went from commuting to not commuting as much, back to commuting again. It was nice because on my view was of the beach on the way to school and on the way back out. So that was kind of cool. But I became the head cross country coach there, the head track coach there. And I actually was able to stay there a lot longer for about 7 years. And that gave me the opportunity to get used to my position, my role, and find a groove that I started getting accustomed to. And that became kind of my whole coaching journey, is coaching at different school sites. I currently do not coach. I'm an athletic director at Lost Altos, and that was kind of the deal, is to oversee the sports programs and be the coach's coach.
Love it. How many years have you been at Los Altos?
This is actually my 5th year. It feels like my 3rd, and we know why, but this is actually my 5th year at Los Altos.
Awesome. So here's my favorite part of the entire story. There are a couple of things that I have to state just for us. You're from Alameda. I'm from Alameda. My mother was the athletic director at Alameda High School, and I grew up crawling under the bleachers at games, and then ended up doing the same thing she did, but did not know that before we got on the call. So that's pretty funny that we have Alameda roots.
So not to drive past 25. If it says 25, you drive 25.
It's like driving down here in Pebble Beach. I got ticketed for going 41 the other day, and it's not my first ticket down here. But yes, those towns, they like their how should we say, their moving violation revenue.
Well,
moving on, let's get back to this though, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We can talk about that all day. What would you say if I asked what you learned when you stepped into your first head coaching job, that given your background as a collegiate athlete, given the fact that you had been through credential school, that you were now a teacher, but now I'm going to be a head coach of a sport, let alone 2 sports. What did you realize right away that you still needed to figure out?
I would say, because I started off at Pittsburgh High School as an assistant coach, and then I took over as the head coach. One of the cool parts was that because I transitioned straight out of college, literally I just competed in nationals in May, and in June, July, August, I'm running with the kids. So I was still at a very peak of my running, that I was able to go on runs with the kids. And to me, that was probably the best part, because I got to learn more about the kids personally and make more one-on-one connections about them, and also motivate them to run faster, because they would jog and I'd push them and force them to talk and then force the pace. So I would say getting to know the athletes to me was a big learning curve of how do you relate to teenagers. And at the time when I started, I was about 22, just turned 23. And so we're so close in age. It was getting them to respect the boundaries that I'm an adult, because a lot of times, depending on who they were, would try to be best friends. They wanted to be my friend. And then there's others that respected the fact that I was the head coach. And so having those boundary lines was a big thing for me when I first started coaching.
Yes, and I would say that is probably a normal occurrence for young coaches first getting started, is what do those boundaries look like and how responsible the adult needs to be to hold those, as the students don't have the self-awareness necessarily to do so.
Yeah,
What
I was gonna say, and not sorry, but not only that, but also not taking things so personal. Because when you're younger, you're trying to make these connections, and when you're dealing with teenagers, they'll say things or they'll do things, and as a coach, sometimes you want it more than they want it. Maybe you want them to be successful and go to championships or go do these things or participate in the sport more than they actually want to. And so that was also kind of a hard balance to step back and say, okay, they, let them do what they want to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure that was also different navigating as you got older and were more experienced and kind of had a track record. The kids knew who you were, but then you left and moved to a different school and then another school. What would you say were the biggest lessons learned in those moves and the challenges you faced that were in those moves as well, in addition to picking up the other season? Like, what would you say are some things that you can point to and be like, hey, this is what I learned here and how it translated to where I'm at now?
I would say learning the culture of the school, but not only the culture of the school, but also the culture of the team that you're taking over. The coach prior would have their rules and expectations, or sometimes lack of rules and expectations. And so you have that transitional period where your seniors, it's almost like there's that, they're fighting for the role of who's in control of the team. And since you're learning the culture of the school, the seniors know more than you because they've been there for the last 4 years, but at the same time, they don't know more than you because of your coaching philosophy. And, maybe a workout, you could put together a solid workout, but to them, because they never did it before, they might not think that's a valid workout. So you're also having to say, hey, look, I know how to coach. I know what I'm doing. So you're almost interviewing, the kids are interviewing you saying, does she really know what she's doing? Or is she just another head coach? Right? That's going to come and go. So depending on if there was consistency in the program, or if there was a high turnover of coaches, then you have different personalities of the kids that you're trying to relate to and put some boundaries and rules in front of. Your juniors, they kind of roll with the punches with the seniors, and your freshmen, those are your babies. Those are the ones that they don't know anything different. And so those are the ones that if you're around that school long enough, that you can see the end results of how you've developed your program. The rules, are they picking up trash after, just those little things, because the other 3 classes have finally recycled out. So you can see that, and this is one of the things that I try to tell my coaches, is you have to give it at least 4 years, and then you'll see the fruits of your labor. You just got to hang through, let the personalities kind of graduate out, or some of them will buy into your program and not everybody will. And by transitioning to different schools, every school was completely different than the next. So going from Pittsburgh, sometimes how you communicate with the students there, it was a lot different than how I was able to communicate with the students and the parents when I was at Arroyo, and then completely different of communication with the parents and athletes at Terra Nova, and how much parents are involved. So every school had different involvement of parents as well. Some of the schools, there was absolutely no parent involvement. You can have a banquet and it's all about the kids, and you might see 3 parents, but you as the coach at Pittsburgh, you're the one putting the banquet on. You don't have team parents coming and doing all the work for you. And when I transitioned to Arroyo, I'm going back to having a banquet and then having the kids start taking ownership of putting the banquet on and going And then going to Terra Nova, it was completely different. We would have a pool party. Well, we couldn't do that at this school. And so just there was constant changing and evolving into what you can and cannot do and the rules, and trying to blend your policies and how you run things is different than the next place.
So on that, 1, 2, 3, you coached at 3 different schools.
Yes.
What would you say are or is the best thing that you did in your program that, looking back in hindsight, went with you to all 3 stops and would go with you as soon as you step back on the field again, because it had such a large ripple effect on the culture you were trying to create?
The one thing that I took, it's going to sound so silly. It's actually really silly and dumb, but one of the things that I took from every school that I coached at was during spring break for track and during cross country, I would do a scavenger hunt. And so cross country, I'd give the kids a list of things and they would run around town, school with their list. And it evolved based off the places I was going. Before it was no cell phones. Then by the time I got to Terra Nova, they were allowed to use their cell phone and take pictures of like a stop sign. They all had to be in the photo of the stop sign. At Elroy, it was just run and collect objects. So during cross country season, it would be doing the scavenger hunt, and it would be timed. And so they had a specific amount of time, so that way they're running for a specific amount of time. So it was an easy workout, but it was an opportunity for the juniors, seniors, and sophomores and freshmen to all bond. So I would switch it up where a varsity boy would be running with the JV girls and intermixing all the groups, because when we would actually put them in workouts, they would be at different training levels. But this was an opportunity to just bring the team together in an easy training run and get to know people on the team. And then for track during spring break, I would do the same thing where I would do the scavenger hunt, but I would mix in the groups. So sprinters, throwers, distance runners would all be mixed up together. So then they got to cross connect with each other and get to know the other event people in there on the team. But then I would also do for spring, like an Easter egg hunt. And so I'd just like put random objects out, and then they would all go and find little crafty Easter egg stuff, which kind of broke it up and just kind of made it fun. And I do little relays and stuff just to get the kids to bond together outside of the competitive training.
It sounds like that was the entire goal, which, to the culture point, is what builds that, right? The interconnectivity of the athletes versus we have to run and get this time. It's like, well, we still have to build a team. So I love that story. What would you say is the best thing you do in your administrative role that would or has come with you or would go with you if you were to leave from a similar aspect or thematic question? Right now we're pivoting out of coaching into athletic administration. What is a similar thing that you think is super important no matter where you go? Like, these are the things we have to do.
One of the things that I started doing when I became an athletic director was building Instagram, social media presence. When I became the AD at Terra Nova, that was my first place where I became an athletic director. I created Instagram with the help of students, of course, because they were the ones that educated me on Instagram. And then when I came to Los Altos, there wasn't a social media presence. And so I created the Instagram and Twitter. Honestly, I focus more on Instagram because that's what the students follow. And I see everybody else who are great and amazing on Twitter posting all their stuff. To me personally, with time, I'm like, I want to focus on what the kids see and what's relevant to them. As much as I love all 1,000 schools that are in the country, my focus is getting the message to our current student athletes and followers. So I do post a lot more on Instagram than Twitter, but I would say the social media presence, because I feel like that's an avenue of support for our students. The other thing that I started at Terra Nova, or was trying to start at Terra Nova, was our student athlete advisory committee council. So student athlete advisory council at Terra Nova, and here at Los Altos, we're calling it student athlete leadership team. I remember in college, my coach, when I was at Cal State Hayward, sent me to the student athlete advisory council. I had no idea what it was, but our AD at the time, Debbie DeAngelis, it was awesome because it brought in people from other sports to talk about what they were doing. But then when Cal State Hayward was going through that transition, we actually got to get some of the inside scoop of what was actually happening. And so I felt that was something that could be valuable at the schools, is having a collective group of student athletes who can make a connection with the AD about what is happening, what changes are happening, scholarship opportunities, or, let's work on this project and, be more visible that we're supporting all sports, not just one specific thing. And so that's always been a work in progress, because when I was at Terra Nova, I had just started it and then I left. So I wasn't there long enough to actually see it thrive. And then now I'm at Los Altos, and right as I was trying to start it, we went into shutdown. And so this year is the rebuilding of, okay, what is this going to look like? And I know going from the conferences, there's other schools that have done the student athlete leadership team, and they call it different things, different places. And so I try to take those little tidbits from what they do and bring it to Los Altos. And so I feel like that is something that no matter where you go, I'd want to try to continue to have that connection, that support for everybody.
Let me follow up with this. If we were to go back to when you first became an athletic director at Terra Nova, and you had coached at Pittsburgh, you'd coached at Arroyo, right? And then Terra Nova. So now you've got years of coaching under your belt, 3 different locations, and now you're going to become the athletic director. What did you realize right away that you were wrong about in your perspective of, well, if I was doing it, this is how it would go?
Say that one more time.
So we all have perspective, right? We're a coach. This is what the AD's doing. This is what they're not doing. This is how it would work out. But now you're finally behind the curtain. Mm-hmm. What did you realize right away that, oh, I didn't have that right, and you needed to figure out so that you could actually do it the right way?
You mean, what did I think the AD wasn't doing, and now I'm on the other side of the curtain?
Sure. Or just things that you thought you were prepared to handle and you realized you weren't.
I would say one of the things that I wasn't prepared for is, it's going to sound terrible, is how lonely it can get. And the reason being is when I got the job at Los Altos, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the students. I didn't know the staff. I only interviewed with the principal and the committee that put me forth before that. And I really didn't have connections to anybody. I don't live in Los Altos. I didn't go to school here. I'm not from the community. I didn't even know where Los Altos was. I just knew it was closer to my house. And I figured that's with the bridge tolls going up, get a job closer to home. So that was kind of my goal, was, hey, a job opened up closer to home. That should be awesome. And so that, I think, was kind of the big thing, because one of the things that in the interview was that I wouldn't coach. And at the time it made sense, because I'm taking over a program of 22 sports and getting to know the area, the district, and rules. And I figured, okay, that makes sense. But it was really hard, and it's hard to make connections with people because the kids don't know you. They don't know that I've ever coached. They only know I coach because I tell them that I coach. The coaches, they only know that I coach because I told them that I coach. Mm-hmm. And so it's harder to make those real connections that I was able to make when I was at my other sites. Mm-hmm. You know, I had my awesome possum, which if I were to play this, she would totally know what that means. I had my inside jokes with my students that they know what it means. And now I really don't have that because I'm viewed more, I think, in their eyes as an administrator, as opposed to a coach that they've made a close connection with. And so that was one of the things that I wasn't prepared for.
Let's stop there for a second and give some advice, let's call it, to other people who are in your shoes, because I think we had like almost 200 at the conference that were in the new AD group, right?
Yes.
So people going into that role, if you had a do-over, or hell, right now you're coming out of COVID, you basically have a do-over, right? What's the advice you would give somebody coming into that role who maybe is an outsider, as you described yourself, or hasn't been at that school before? What are three things you think maybe are the top of the pecking sheet, or the order that you need to do?
Give me a moment to think, because I feel like that's a deep question. Three
Think
things.
as long as you want. We can always edit out the breaks once you come up with it.
Okay, because I want to be thoughtful about my response.
And think about it this way too, Coach. You moved from Pittsburgh to Arroyo, and then Arroyo to Terra Nova, right? And it's one thing when you're in the classroom and you're meeting all these points of contact, and then you're coaching them, you get more points of contact, to now where you're just AD, which is a big deal, but right, you don't have the luxury of the points of contact. So how did you navigate that? And what was good? What was bad? And what would you do differently? And I think that's the best advice. It's like, well, actually, this is what I did. Didn't work great. This is what I would do if I had to do it.
Yeah, I think I would have definitely tried to start the student athlete leadership team sooner. However, the flip side is when you're overwhelmed just trying to learn all the policies and all the meetings that you encountered, it made it super hard to do that. So I was trying to just get used to the grind before I could start adding more tasks to my plate. I feel like by not trying to start that, or maybe not start a student athlete leadership team, but maybe have a get to know you AD lunch where maybe provide something to get the kids to come up and talk to you, and some like try to figure something out where there's a way that besides clearing them for clearances and say, no, you're denied because you didn't turn in a physical, because some of the first points of contact was you didn't do the paperwork right. Well, now you've already started off on like saying no, you're the no police, as opposed to the, hey, it's great to meet you. It's nice for that you're here. So definitely like trying to start off with an event of some sort that is reasonable, that you get to meet people in a positive, where it's not a stressful event, maybe like a hamburgers and hot dogs, or for something like, and have the coaches. When I first got the job here during the summer, I had a bagels and coffee drop in, where the coaches can come and just drop in at any time for bagels and coffee and introduce themselves. And that was nice because I got to meet some of my coaches before the school year even started. And so I would say, as a new AD going into a new place, that would be something that I would suggest, is having an opportunity where people can just drop in and get to know you, get to have that one-on-one conversations or what have you.
Well, no, that's a great idea. I think also you mentioned, how can I connect with my coaches before the school year starts? When you're coming in from the outside, you probably know none of them. There's almost this, here's the Rolodex. Let me call and get everybody on the phone and talk to them and meet with them and figure out how we can serve. And then you got to do the same thing with the student body, which is probably very large. So
yeah,
and pick your battles.
Yeah, and so I feel like by doing the bagels and coffee, some of the coaches that came in, I kind of got to know their personalities right away. And so it prepared me a little bit of what their needs and wants are. And it was nice because then when I would go to a practice, they would introduce me to their students. by making that introduction already, they would be like, oh, this is our new athletic director. And so they would kind of do the introductions, and by the kids, the athletes seeing that we are connected, that we know each other, or we're smiling at each other, that it's not a contentious relationship. And I feel like a lot of times athletes look to our coaches, and they do, for guidance and role modeling of behavior, and they feed off of our coaches. And if they see contentious interactions, they know there's something wrong. They might not know what it is, but they know that there's something there. And so by having those first interactions where it's positive, it's friendly, then the kids know that you're safe, you're okay.
Let me ask a follow-up that is related to what you mentioned, going out to practice. As the athletic director, often we get bogged down in our office, buried in paperwork. But once we get out of it and we're out watching practices and hanging out and talking to the coaches, talking to the athletes, over the course of your coaching career and athletic director experience, what I'm really interested in is transferability of approach, discipline to another discipline, right? So you're a cross country coach, you're a track coach. What did you learn watching the basketball coaches? What did you learn watching volleyball, water polo, that you were able to steal and apply to your discipline? And while you're not coaching anymore, the question is more framed to help us get out of our tunnel vision.
Yeah.
But what have you seen in your time that you're like, whoa, that's really good, and you've either offered to another sports coach or you've used yourself?
Oh yeah, no, actually that's a perfect question, because I just did this a couple months ago. One of the things that I do after school is I try to walk around to all of my sports and just check in with the coach, or just walk by the gym, walk by their practice, because sometimes, because 90% of my coaches are off campus, that they don't have that personal contact where they could just drop by my office at any time. And so I'd walk in and be like, hey, do you need anything from me? Just checking in, how are things going? And have those simple conversations. And I feel like that opens that I'm visible, so they know I'm there to support them in case they do need some instantaneous question, or if it's a quick question as opposed to an email or phone call or text. And what I've seen that other coaches have done that I was able to help others and pass along. I had a coach, he was struggling. He's been a coach for many, many years. And he's like, hey, I just can't get the team bonding to work. What I did in the past doesn't seem to be working. Do you have any ideas? To me, I was like, what? You're asking me for ideas for your team?
Scavenger hunt.
And you have more experience than I do ever coaching. I was so excited. So I was like, wow, they're asking me. So it was like an exciting moment for me. But and so I shared with him, I was like, hey, well, the cross country team, they just did tie-dye as a team bonding activity. And then it was during, it was in October. So we have pumpkins. I was like, hey, why don't you have your athletes get into teams, carve pumpkins, and do a carving pumpkin contest? And then you vote, bring the pumpkins to the next game and have people vote on the best pumpkin, and kind of make it a friendly competition. And they ended up carving pumpkins, and the kids actually in their surveys mentioned that they enjoyed carving pumpkins. I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of cool. Like, I know that's not, discipline, respect, honor, and integrity, but it's those little bonding activities that I feel kids really appreciate. And our cross country coach, when she first took over, she has 100+ kids out there because she's amazing and the program is amazing. And at one point she's like, there's so many kids, I don't know how to keep track of everybody in this, in a certain fashion. And I shared with her, I was like, hey, when I was at Pittsburgh, I had teams. So even at Terra Nova, we had little miniature teams, and those kids held each other accountable, and you give them points and rewards, and they do silly things together.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps with attendance, because the kids will tell you Sally's missing, and you can easily see Sally Sue's missing because you don't see her with her team during the warm-ups. And those are things that you can do across all of the different sports when you have either high numbers or low numbers, is putting them into like little challenging groups. You'll have some friendly competition within the team.
They decided to test the intercom system right now. So we'll be editing this out. That's fine. All right, that way he can't talk to me. All right, let's get back to this then. How would you say that you have gleaned similar information from your fellow athletic directors, either at other school sites within your district, at the conference we just went to, at CCSADA, but things you've been able to learn by being in that group that maybe were directly applicable at your site, maybe they weren't, but where you had some aha moments that have been super helpful that you can share with others?
I would say aha moments, things that are simple and silly, was scheduling was one of those aha. I originally was doing the Google Docs and having the coaches fill it in and trying to coordinate all that. And in my mind, that was the way that, okay, it's organized and they can see it. Well, my aha by connecting with other ADs was having a Google Calendar that of each of the facilities that is shared with the coaches. If volleyball is having practice from 4 to 6, the basketball coach can see that it's from 4 to 6 and then have their open gym, let's say at 6:30 to 7:30, because they're all shared on the Google Calendar, so they know when the gym is open. And that Google Calendar is also shared with the custodial staff, so they know when teams are in the gyms, and therefore they know when they're allowed to go in and clean, or if it's being used, or if there's a game, a match, or if there's conflicts. And as much as that sounds silly, it was that aha of like, wow, I could just make a Google Calendar for this facility. Things are rented, so I could just duplicate it so that my coaches can see that it's rented at this time and it's not accessible. And I have to remind them that it's there and to utilize that calendar like everything else. But it's helpful because the coaches that do know and do follow it and do pay attention, then when they ask, hey, can I use a fitness room from 6 to 7? Sure, no problem. I will put you in there from 6 to 7. And everybody who has that calendar can see what program is supposed to be in there. And that's worked wonders for me, and it's worked wonders for our coaches. It's the how much do I give them access to make changes to that? Because right now it's just me that makes the changes and inputs the schedule, which one of the things I need to learn is to let go of the rope a little bit. But sometimes if I let go a little too much, then it can become a knot. And so I have to be cautious on who has access and when.
It's
But
funny that you mentioned that, because I was just in communication with all of our aquatics people about the pool, and we have Google calendars, and I just was like, here, gave them all edit access and go. And until they get themselves kicked off of the calendar, we'll trust it and see what happens. But it's exactly what you're talking about. Who do I let edit it? Well, let's just start with let them all edit it and let's see what happens.
Yeah. So right now, with a couple of the coaches, I said, look, you've been here for a while, go ahead and here's the editing access. Mm-hmm. And then once certain things started to happen, I took it out. I took off their editing access. They're like, nah, you don't get to just change where people go. So yeah, it's one of those, it's not that I don't trust you. I like you, I trust you, but I got to look at everybody's schedules, not just yours.
Yeah, so. Correct.
I mean, so that was one of those things that was kind of one of the takeaways that I've gotten from having conversations with other ADs of how do you handle this, or how do you handle this situation? A lot of times there's questions that I'm like, hey, I just had this happen. Has this ever happened to you? Or, you know, we're going to have interviews. What questions do you ask? Kind of thing.
Let me pivot us here for a second, because statistically, you are in a minority group, being a female in the athletics space in general, but definitely in the athletic administration space. Can you share some challenges and successes that can maybe help guide others that are trying to get into the space? And obviously, as the president of our CCS association, you're good at what you do. And, I want to make sure that we provide an opportunity and a voice, for people that may feel they don't have one.
I would say challenges, and this even went back to when I was a coach, because there wasn't a ton of female head coaches either. There's a lot of female assistant coaches, but not so much head coaches. So sometimes a challenge will be being the only female in the room. And as silly as it may sound, not having the confidence of feeling that what you say is going to be heard. And if you're going to say something, you want to make sure that you know what you're saying, so that you are not perceived as ignorant and that you don't know any better, and you don't know. So therefore, don't say, people won't actually listen to what you have to say. So I found that to be a challenge at times. And I could say the same thing to you and get completely disregarded. And then the guy next to me can say the same thing. And, oh, that was a great idea. Or, oh my God, Joe had this really good idea that we were able to implement. And then because of that, we were able to do X, Y, and Z. And so it, like I said, it sounds silly, but there's times where your ideas get shoved off to the side. Someone else says the exact same thing and gets all the credit for it. And I know that we're in the industry of not always getting credit and accolades for what you do. I totally understand that. At the same time, it's the competitive athlete in me that if I'm practicing and I'm in the competition and I'm running across that line, I want credit for running across that line, just like I want a time, just like any other person. That has been one of those challenges.
How do you navigate that? Because I think, to what I was searching for, it set us up for the next layer of this. How do you navigate that component where maybe you're not being heard in the way in which you deserve to be, given your experience and background, right? How do you push through that? How do you garner the support that's necessary to make sure that you're being heard? And how do you coach others that may be female, maybe they're just young, and who knows, but they have good ideas and they're not being heard because of stage and station, whatever it might be.
Right. I would say make allies in the room. Be okay with going out of your way to introduce yourself and make a connection to people, that you don't always need to wait for somebody to come up to you to introduce themselves. That sometimes you might have to be that person that walks up and says, "Hi, my name's Michelle. What's your name?" "My name's Justin." And then you get to talk and get to know them just a little bit more, that in the next meeting, well, now Justin knows what I'm all about and will be more willing to be my ally, that when I do speak up, they're willing to speak up and support, or at least nod their head as a sign of encouragement that, yeah, you're on the right track, keep going. Or if you're not, at least help support. Well, I think she was trying to say blah, blah, blah. So finding those allies in the room, I would say, is one way that I feel like I've learned to navigate the system.
It's interesting because I have often jokingly, but somewhat accurately, portrayed our league meetings and even your coaching meetings, if you are a head coach of a sport and you're going to do all league stuff or whatever, that there's a certain political aspect of it where you need to be whipping votes outside of the room before you ever go into that place. And what you just mentioned, the idea of allies, isn't just so you feel supported, but it's so that you have people that are going to hold you accountable, people that are going to help you be successful, people that are going to tell you that, hey, you dropped the ball on this one and we need to be better. And so to what you said a long time ago in this call, which was, it's lonely work. You are serving all of your constituency, but at the same time, it's like, you can't necessarily be friends with a lot of people because the buck stops with you. So it's like, how do you navigate all of that? And Gina talks about it all the time, that going to these conferences and making these connections, not just in the state or the section, but nationally, is because they're the only other people that know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
How would you say that has helped you thrive at this point in your career?
I would say it's helped a lot because I've met people that have really, like, I feel like they're my cheerleaders. They want me to be successful and I want them to be successful. And in my speech that I had at the conference, I completely did not mention this person, which I am kicking myself, is Paul Snow. I feel like I met him when I was in PAL in that league as an athletic director. And at our first meetings, I never really got to talk to anybody, get to know anybody. And my first conference, I sat down next to him and he just kind of leaned over. He's like, hey, you're Michelle, you're the new AD. And we started talking, and just his engagement, and we exchanged numbers, we've gone golfing, and I know that I can count on him. I can call him and say, hey, Paul, I had this situation. How do you handle it? And when we've gone against each other in competitions, sometimes it doesn't end well with our spectators, but I know that him and I can have an honest conversation. I'm like, oh, that wasn't cool, and he's a part of CCSADA. He's a conference rep, but he's been such a huge supporter. I even had him look at my Google Slides before the presentation just to make sure, like, hey, from a male perspective, how does this come off? So I'm not doing too much. And it was great to be able to have that person in the corner that I can say, hey, what are your thoughts about this? Or what do you think we should be doing about this? And so that part's been pretty neat. And because we're athletic directors, we do have that instant connection, but it's been great get to know so many different people. Like, for instance, podcasts. I didn't know this was like a whole big thing. And so it's cool that a lot of schools do this, and I don't know how you find the time to do it, but it's neat that other ADs are doing some really spectacular things. And
I want to take what you just said in regards to using Paul as the example and offer for both coaches and athletic directors out there listening. You don't even need to know your fellow colleagues to pick up the phone and call them and ask for guidance, because they may have seen it. And sometimes what I've found over the years, not just as the AD, but as a coach and as a teacher, sometimes you're better off having people who have no connection to your school site, to your situation, so they can be objective in how you describe the scenario and ask questions that you may not have thought about.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had other situations where I've called Jean saying, hey, this just happened to me. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And she's down in Salinas. And at the time I was up at Terra Nova and I was a new athletic director. I barely knew her. I met her once at a conference, and she was friendly and kind. And I had her business card, and I'm like, oh my God, this just happened. Like, what do I do? Who do I talk to? And you just kind of get into that panic mode, because there's times where you're like, well, you could talk to your significant other, but they may not understand the severity of what might have just occurred. And so by talking and reaching out to other ADs, it's helpful. In our league, they just hired a new athletic director, and I sent her an email and I said, hey, anything you need, just give me a call. Here's my cell phone number. If you could join us in CCSADA, that's great. Network with people, be a part of things, but don't hesitate to email or call.
Mhm.
And she called me, or she emailed me something simple. It was
Mhm.
just a quick 2-second response. And to me, I want her to be successful. I want her to stick around. And the only way to do that is by following through and saying, if you need anything, here's my number.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah. And I think that's super important advice, and that we often don't follow through enough because we don't want to maybe look stupid that we don't know, but pick up the phone and call. It's a whole lot easier to get an answer from someone that's been where you are.
Yeah. And I think at times, and I feel this is something that a lot of people may need to hear. Yes, we are all busy, but we're never busy enough to help someone. And I think a lot of times we don't ask for help because we feel like we're interrupting someone else's busyness. That sometimes if you call and ask for help, that makes that person feel like you you've made an impact on them enough where they feel comfortable coming and asking you for help.
Yes. And to your point, the way this was described recently for me in another group I'm a part of was, if someone in your circle or even not in your circle called you and was having a tough time, would you stop and listen? Yes. But yeah, we never call anybody else when we are, because we don't want to burden anybody. So know that they are going to respond the same way you are. Reach out for help, and consider that before you try to take on the burdens of the world by yourself in a job that is very challenging just in its nature. So, Coach, appreciate you being here today. Let's wrap up with that, and looking forward to seeing you at our next meeting. And actually, we should probably get on another Zoom call to figure out the things that we got to figure out before our next meeting. So
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And last thing is, there's speed bumps in the road. It's how we drive over them, but we'll get over them and move forward. So, thank you.